by doing this virtual inspection, an NEMT business owner is effectively saving thousands of dollars per year.
Absolutely. And it's from the comfort of wherever their vehicle is.
Welcome back to NEMT Experts. I've got Hamed Yazdi, the co-founder of Rideshare Mechanic, better known as RSM. Hamed, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Nirav. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. It was great seeing you at the NEMT conference recently, and you are going to tell us all about vehicle inspections. So to start off with, Hamed, I don't want to get into your background and RSM just yet. I want to do that later in the episode. I want to start off with simply, what are vehicle inspections? And especially, the difference between daily vehicle inspections that your drivers do versus the sort of official ones that are more mandated. But can you just tell us, what are vehicle inspections?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Nirav. I really appreciate everything that your company does. Not just, helping your transportation providers with, the wonderful software and improving their operations, but also the education you're providing to our, community and industry through, this platform. So thanks for having me. It's an honor. So inspections, anyone who has a vehicle has probably gotten an inspection. There's different types of inspections, but ultimately we're trying to make sure that the vehicles are safe, right? Essentially, statistically, the most dangerous thing that everyday people do on a regular basis is drive their cars. And part of that is making sure the driver is safe, and a big part of that is making sure that the vehicle is safe. Especially when we're talking about transporting people from point A to point B, there's liability involved. We want to get these people to their doctor's appointments, their medical engagements, in a safe and timely manner. We got to make sure the vehicle is safe. There are, like you mentioned, more frequent inspections, and those are more just making sure, okay, my headlights work, my tire tread looks good, just day to day, more like a checklist. Some documented, some it's just, kind of mental. When it comes to the more formal inspections, it's a little bit more rigorous. There's a checklist to go through. Some things that you're not checking as frequently, things like maybe brake fluid, things that, maybe don't need to be checked on a daily basis. And then we have other inspections that are much more thorough, which, if you're going to purchase like a used vehicle, you'd want to take your vehicle to a mechanic and do maybe a 200-point plus inspection because it's a one-time thing that you're doing. So ultimately, the goal is to make sure the vehicles are safe, and we're checking that on an appropriate frequency based on the type of inspection needed.
Right. So there are two, large reasons to do vehicle inspections. Number one is the obvious, like you mentioned, we got to make sure the vehicles are safe, right? And number two is sort of a forcing function. Like oftentimes there are brokers or, the people who give you ride requests who require your NEMT business to get certain vehicle inspections done. Can you tell us about, who's requiring these vehicle inspections to be done, and when they require it, what are those type of vehicles inspections?
Absolutely, Nirav. And like you said, it all goes back to safety. For the transportation provider, obviously they have let's say an inherent desire to run a business that's safe for their own users and the stakeholders, but then they are required for compliance purposes. And so the brokers are required to maintain records to essentially prove that all of the transportation providers, the TPs in our network, do have the vehicle requirements, just like they have to, have credentialing and other areas of compliance like drug tests and background checks and other types of, checks and balances that are in place to make sure the network is compliant. The same goes for vehicle inspections. So you asked the question, who requires them? Well, there's a number of players. There's the state and local regulatory agencies. These are government bodies, and they require, certain baselines to be met. Again, ultimate goal, safety. There's the managed care organization, or MCOs, that many people in, our industry work with. And these are, part of their contractual agreements are to make sure that the vehicles meet a certain standard of safety. There are the brokers. The broker's job is essentially to, take the payer who's essentially funding the ride and matching them with the end user or the passenger through their network of transportation providers. So they are essentially the stewards of those inspection records to make sure that they're compliant. And there's also the health plans. The insurance companies that may be, directly stipulate the vehicle inspection requirements to align with their internal policies to meet those patient needs as well. So there's a number of people that require the inspections.
Okay, thank you. And now let's talk about how often these vehicle inspections need to be done. So, I mean, when a broker or a health plan or whoever it is that's requiring you to get these vehicle inspections done, when they say, hey, you need to do it, it's not just a one-off. Inspect the vehicles one time and then you're good, right? They probably require you to periodically do these more in-depth inspections. Typically, how often is that? Or is there even a typical?
Yeah, so it's different depending on the different companies. Some of them require the inspection to be done at a minimum annually. So I would say the minimum frequency is annual, which makes sense. I mean, we're putting thousands of miles on these vehicles every month. These are, it's operationally intensive. It's not a normal passenger vehicle. It's a commercial use vehicle. And so the minimum should be once a year. Some of them require once every quarter. Now, that creates some challenges because a lot of the transportation providers, in an attempt to, have more business, they work with multiple brokers and different entities that have overlapping requirements. One broker may require quarterly inspections, the other may require annual inspections. They have different time frames that don't always line up. And so in many cases, we're having vehicles inspected much more than maybe the baseline requires, which in some ways it might be a good thing because we're trying to become more stringent, but a lot of times it's overkill and can cause inconvenience, which leads into why we do what we do. But that's probably a different question.
Yeah, which we'll get to soon. I want to talk now about what are the actual steps of getting a vehicle inspection done without RSM, right? The traditional way. I'm an NEMT business. I don't know about RSM. My broker or health plan requires me to get it done. What do I actually do? What's the process like?
Yeah, typically as a transportation provider, your broker will let you know. No, some brokers, they offer in-person inspections and some brokers offer virtual inspections through some kind of video chat medium. And that became very common during COVID, especially when people weren't traveling or meeting in person. Let's take the traditional route. So you have a representative from a broker. That person will essentially, their job is to travel, to be in the field and meet with their transportation providers in different regions that they support. And so basically they would reach out to the TP, someone typically, a director of operations or someone who handles compliance, and they'll make sure that they can meet in person at a specific location and then be able to inspect those vehicles in person and walk around the vehicle and go through their checklist, go inside the vehicle, look at the outside of the vehicle, and basically make sure that everything meets the mark and they check them all off and make sure the vehicle passes. That's typically what we see. Normally, these vehicle inspections are done during normal business hours. And so sometimes, it does require some coordination. It can cause some challenges with, the TP trying to run their business and figure out when to actually meet. Sometimes they have to take the vehicle somewhere that's maybe, not their own facility to meet with the representative from the broker. And keep in mind, this might be repeated for 2 or 3 different brokers, or maybe even more, depending on the size of the fleet and how many they work with, how many brokers they work with.
Okay. And what's the cost of doing these kinds of traditional inspections in terms of money and also in terms of time?
Yeah, so the money aspect, usually the broker covers the cost. The cost of sending someone out, that person staying in a hotel, that person traveling. It's usually a cost that the broker essentially takes on. The cost to the transportation provider, if they're doing the inspection with that broker, there's no dollar cost. However, taking that vehicle off the platform does create downtime. So there's an opportunity cost. Maybe they could be they could be completing a trip during that time. And sometimes that could be, in a very busy time, so it becomes more expensive essentially in terms of lost opportunity. Sometimes if they have to drive that vehicle, you're paying for the driver's time and the vehicle, to be essentially grounded and not in use. So let's say the driver has to drive sometimes an hour to meet with the broker inspector, sometimes, and then they have to drive back and then do the inspection. So these can be quite expensive. And we have been told from the research that we've done, anywhere between $200 to $1,000 per vehicle per year is the cost that some of these transportation providers are seeing per vehicle. So it can really add up for a transportation
That is
provider.
a very non-trivial amount of money.
Exactly. And so we're talking about the total cost of doing an inspection, right? The hard costs and the soft costs. I mean, there's no dollar exchange usually, unless they're going to, some of them have an opportunity to go work with like a local mechanic that the broker essentially will accept an inspection from. And that has its own issues, which we can also, get into a little bit later, especially when it comes to inspection fraud. But then there's a hard cost and the soft cost. But for most of them, it's more of the soft cost, but that can really add up when we're talking $200 to $1,000 per vehicle per year.
Yeah. So now, Hamed, let's get to the fun part of the conversation. Can you tell us about your background and how you ended up co-founding RSM?
Sure, it's an interesting story, Nirav. And so the name of our company is Rideshare Mechanics. We have a background in the rideshare TNC space. We started, our company 7 years ago. Before that, my business partner and I were part of ambassador programs for some of the, one of the large TNC companies, and we were essentially traveling across the country and recruiting drivers. It was a very much, in-person, feet on the street experience where we were talking to drivers and helping them get onboarded. Many of these drivers, we realized that they've gone through the whole process, but the vehicle inspection was kind of a hindrance for them. And because of the inconvenience of it, or the challenges, or the logistics, they just kind of went through halfway the application process and fell off. And so we realized that when we were on site and able to do the inspections, the experience was much better. And the drivers were pretty excited to get that, to reduce the friction in the process, if you will, because a lot of it was highly digitized. And so we realized that, okay, let's start offering these inspections. There were some pilots by some of the TNC companies. It turns out that some of the NEMT companies, the brokers, were also doing virtual inspections at the time. So we really focused on, okay, we can't be everywhere at once supporting these drivers. We want to provide them with convenience, but also we realized that a lot of drivers don't like going to a mechanic. They don't trust mechanics. They feel that if they go to a mechanic, they're going to get cheated and try to be upsold on a bunch of different things. And so we focus just on the inspection. You either pass or you fail. There's really nothing to upsell you here. And then, COVID happened. And so that also created, some interest in not meeting in person. But eventually our business started with, okay, we're going to offer vehicle inspections virtually over a video chat, kind of like what you and I are doing right now. And we developed a whole process around that and really built it into a business. We took it very seriously. That was our core product. And, we have today an ASC certified master technician on staff to help us make sure that we are providing the most thorough inspection possible without physically being present with the vehicle. And then we essentially built out that whole process. So all of our inspectors who are certified through our company, we have our Bureau of Automotive Repair license that essentially creates that certification. So we are a licensed mechanic, and all of our staff members follow the same protocols. So we essentially just continued building that process. And while at first the focus was how do we help the drivers, we realized that it's really doing a lot more than that, in terms of user safety at large, eliminating inspection fraud and being able to use technology for document retention, audit trails, and even video footage. All of that kind of developed as we realized our partners and customers wanted more. Now, as I mentioned, we started in the TNC space. We expanded to, within TNC, child transportation companies that essentially take children to schools. We expanded to the peer-to-peer rental space. When you essentially, it's a dual-sided marketplace where you can rent someone else's vehicle. And then we got into the NEMT industry and realized that it's a very interesting space with a lot of different players. And also, there's a lot of area where we can add an impact, especially now that we've built such a solid process and product using our technology. So that's kind of how we ended up here. And right now, we have different types of inspections for different types of companies, but we've really focused on enhancing the quality process and making sure that at the end of the day, safety is the ultimate goal. while we can offer a good experience to the drivers.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. So let's get into the practical aspect of, like, let's say I'm an NEMT business owner. I got to get my vehicle inspection done because the broker or health plan is requiring me to. And I find out about RSM. And I say, hey, instead of having all those costs, we're taking my vehicle to a mechanic shop, having the downtime of the vehicle, I don't want to incur all those costs. Let me use RSM service. What are the steps that I go through to do that?
Sure. So basically, if a TP wants to work with us, they just come to our website and essentially select the right type of inspection they want. We have like an NEMT product there. And then they schedule a time that works for them on our calendar. We do support evening and weekend hours to accommodate their schedule, so they're really not experiencing any downtime on those vehicles. And essentially, it's typically a 20 to 30-minute appointment. We provide some instructions of how to be prepared for your vehicle. And there's some things, we got to get creative. We're not physically present at the vehicle. So, to measure the tire tread, for example, we want to make sure the person has a penny with them and they can stick the penny upside down and make sure that the tread covers Abe Lincoln's forehead. There's little things like that, or, how to pop the trunk open and see the brake fluid. They're going to have to drive the vehicle a little bit forward and backwards during the inspection process, and maybe prop the phone up so we can see the tail lights and listen to the muffler and make sure that the brakes are not screeching, because they're designed to, when they're worn down, to make noise when you're in reverse. So there's all these, creative things that we do, which again, we developed with the assistance of our certified master technician, ASC certified master technician on staff, and essentially walk the person through that process. So they're holding their phone. We have our inspector on our end instructing them on what to do, so that driver or operations person or administrator is essentially the surrogate inspector on behalf of our inspector, who's doing the inspection remotely and essentially viewing this entire process. And it's a video, it's not pictures. We really try to eliminate opportunities to potentially cut corners or, commit fraud. And then we record that inspection process as well and make it available to the parties that may need it, like the broker or even maybe a regulator or a payer, depending on what the interest is.
And so effectively, by doing this virtual inspection, an NEMT business owner is effectively saving thousands of dollars per year, right?
Absolutely. And it's from the comfort of wherever the vehicle is, the driveway, the parking lot, it doesn't matter really. As long as there's good lighting, and sometimes at night, they take the vehicle to a gas station so we can see clearly, and we do the whole process within 20 to 30 minutes. And then they get the form, digitally sent to them, as well as the video recording.
That is awesome. Hamed, can you share a bit about the traction that you've had in the NEMT industry with NEMT businesses actually using RSM? I know that you've been in talks with some brokers and health plans, and NEMT businesses have been using RSM to actually do this.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if I can share any specific names, but I will say that historically our company, we've completed over 150,000 inspections now in the last 7 years of being in business. NEMT is a newer industry and sector for us, but an area that we're very much focused on. So that's why we're going to conferences like NEMTAC and doing activities around that and designing specific inspections for the NEMT industry. For example, we have the ambulatory inspection, which let me see my notes here. It's 50 points right now. The traditional TNC inspection is usually about 36 points. And what we do is we try to standardize. Different brokers, different states have different inspection requirements. So what we would rather do is do a more comprehensive one that incorporates all the requirements, kind of a greatest common factor or common denominator, if you will, and make sure that we're going above and beyond when we can. But then we also have the wheelchair accessible and the stretcher accessible vehicles, and those are like a 65-point inspection. So definitely more on the ambulatory side, because most TPs, let's call it on average a 75-25 split, 75%, ambulatory rides for maybe curb to curb access, and then 25% wheelchair and stretcher. Of course, it could be different. Some TPs are more focused on the wheelchair and stretcher accessible vehicles. But we definitely do have customers in the NEMT space. We have brokers that work with us directly, and we integrate into their credentialing platform. So through an API, we complete the inspection, and the inspection form goes directly into that platform. That's essentially their single source of credentialing truth, if you will. And then we also have some TPs that just come to us directly. The broker has given them the opportunity to seek an inspection from an inspection provider outside of one of the employees of the broker, and they come to us because they like the convenience, and we complete it, and then we can provide that documentation to the broker directly.
Awesome. So tell me this, let's say I'm a TP, I find out about rideshare, about RSM, and I don't want to go send my vehicle to the mechanic shop. Like, I want to use RSM services. How do I know if I can actually do that and, have those vehicle inspections, be approved by whatever broker or health plan I'm working with? How do I know if I'm actually, allowed to use RSM to do this?
Mm-hmm. Well, any company, any entity that it allows a certified mechanic to do your inspection, it shouldn't be a problem. So you may want to just check with the broker, am I allowed to use, a mechanic of my choice, as long as they have the credentials and the certification. And then the broker, would respond to that. The other option is just go ahead and do it, and we'll provide the inspection form. And in that case, it's more like, ask for forgiveness than permission. Typically, we haven't really had issues with that. We have had TPs just reach out to us, and we've provided the inspection form, and they submit it, and then it's really on the broker to, if they didn't like that, to go back and say, well, this doesn't work for us. But for the most part, we've seen that to work just fine.
Yeah, and Hamed, you and I were talking offline about multiple big brokers. NEMT businesses have used RSM for vehicle inspections for those big brokers, and it's been perfectly fine.
Or they have their own in-house team that does virtual inspections. Now, in that case, not only do they have to, have that expertise in-house, we've also heard anecdotally from some of the brokers why they tried programs like that, especially during COVID, and then shut them down. And the reason was because they didn't have proper quality control metrics in place. Some brokers adopted this virtual inspection model just as kind of a knee-jerk reaction during COVID. They wanted to keep the business operations running, and they weren't able to send people to meet with, the TPs. But it wasn't really, a core competency for them. We've developed a lot of processes and protocols in place to ensure that we have a very high-quality process that's repeatable and scalable. And most companies trying to just do that, it might seem very simple on the surface. Oh, anybody with an iPhone can do a FaceTime video inspection, but it's a very methodical way to do it properly. And so I think a lot of the brokers realize that they can't do it properly. They don't have the records. They're not recording the inspections. They're not adhering to the same process. They don't have a standard, form that they're digitizing, and they don't have access to the audit trails. They're still dealing with, a lot of paper. And those are a lot of manual, processes that are not efficient. And so we essentially take that out of the equation for them. So to go back to your question, yes, some of them use our services. Some of them still do it in-house on their own. And for those brokers that do it in-house, we try to educate them on why we think it's a better idea for them to offload that to our company. This is our sole focus, and we can scale it and make sure the quality and operations is there. We can eliminate any inspection fraud. And frankly, we don't really have an interest in the outcome. We don't care if the vehicle passes or fails. So there's also no conflict of interest, and you're minimizing liability on the broker's end. So there's a lot of reasons why we believe brokers should just offload it to us. But to your point, a lot of them do work with us as well.
Hamed, you've been running RSM for years now. I'm sure you've come across a lot of interesting stories in dealing with TPs, transportation providers, trying to do, vehicle inspections. Maybe the traditional way hasn't worked out. Are there any anecdotes or fun stories you can share with us about, success stories you've had with NEMT businesses that have used RSM?
There are some interesting anecdotes, and it's funny because we have our kind of team calls, and every time there's no shortage of people who want to volunteer on our inspectors want to volunteer and share an interesting story from people who didn't speak English, and our inspectors using Google Translate to try to communicate with them. You know, how do you say honk the horn in Russian, for example? So we try to get creative. You know, we are a virtual company and everybody's remote, and we like to feel that fosters some level of creativity and figuring out just how to get things done. We do have Spanish-speaking inspectors and French-speaking inspectors, but we do come across that. So that's always fun to see. Sometimes when people are downloading the Zoom client or they're using Zoom, they might have some interesting backgrounds already pre-saved on their settings that they didn't really intend for us to see. So that's interesting. You know, there's just the fun aspect of customer service, right? Going above and beyond. There's actually, so my favorite comments when we have a lot of reviews, you know, thankfully, in general, our customers love us. I think we have a 4.9 rating with over 3,000 reviews on Google. But one of the things that I love to see is when people say that this inspection that I did with RSM was more thorough than the inspection I got from my local mechanic. And so that just, you know, it really allows me to kind of give myself a pat on the back and know that, hey, we're doing something right. Like, we are not going to cut corners just because it's easy to do. I mean, a lot of mechanics, and we won't go into this in too detail right now, but, you know, I mean, they don't want to do inspections. They don't make money on inspections, right? I mean, they want to bill $200 an hour to change your tires and brakes and, you know, all the other things that mechanics really make money on. To do an inspection for them is not really worth it. For us, it is worth it because this is our entire business. This is how we make money. And so we've optimized our business to do inspections. And so that's what we like doing, and we do it very thoroughly and correctly. But we had this one situation where there was this driver, and she kept kind of saying, oh, I can't really put my phone down to show the back of the vehicle. And, you know, we have a very strict policy. Like, hey, if we can't do a thorough inspection, then guess what? By default, your inspection, your vehicle is going to fail. We cannot pass the vehicle and give you an inspection form, the document that says we pass it, we certify it. No, we can't until we can see everything. It turns out that, you know, this person kept arguing with our inspector that, no, it's too hard. I need someone else to come hold it. I can't really do this. It turns out that, you know, the back brake light was out. And so the brake light was out, and this person was trying to, you know, cut corners and thought that by doing a virtual inspection with us, she could get away with it. But, you know, I commend our team to, you know, essentially stay firm in the fact that, you know, we can already be perceived as kind of pushing the envelope and operating in this zone where it's a little bit different from traditional means. So we have to make sure that we don't give any opportunity to cut corners like that. So that was a proud moment, I'd say, for when I heard our teammate explain that.
I love that. That is awesome, Hamed. I have, you know, known you for the past 2 years, you know, at the NEMT conferences, and I've seen your company progress, and I think what you're doing is obviously the future, and I'm excited to see as RSM grows and saves the industry tons and tons of money and effort and waste. So kudos to you, Hamed, and RSM. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think would be worth sharing with our audience of transportation providers?
You know, I would like to kind of elaborate on the whole idea of eliminating fraud and making sure that things are in place. I mean, to operate a virtual inspection company, there has to be certain guardrails in place. You know, I mean, we developed a whole technology system that essentially every inspection that's done is recorded, the date, the outcome, if the vehicle failed, why it failed, the inspection report, you know, click, open it up. We provide the right access to the right people for their inspection forms and the videos. The reason we have the recorded videos is to make sure we have that transparency. You know, we have that control. There's a lot of things in place that have to be, you know, properly, you know, accounted for. Otherwise, you know, it just becomes kind of the Wild West, and anyone with a phone thinks they can do a virtual inspection. There's a lot more involved to it. So that's the one thing I would say. The second thing is I would ask people to just be more open-minded. You know, and when I was in, I was presenting to the, you know, Nevada Transportation Association, and the chief compliance officer, who had a background in traditional mechanics, you know, and family members and whatnot were mechanics. And so it was just, there was that preconceived notion that, no, you got to inspect the vehicle while you're there in person. You got to do a physical inspection. And I'm all for physical inspections. I'm not saying they're bad. There's just a lot of opportunity to make mistakes, and whether intentional or unintentional, there's a lot of opportunity for inspection fraud that's very difficult to control. I'll give you an example from my own experience. When I was driving for a Lyft back in the day, a long time ago, I took my vehicle to a local mechanic by my house. And I won't say which one because this isn't very favorable for them. I'm one of the large national chains. And the person, I showed them the inspection form that I got, and he looked at my vehicle and he said, yeah, it looks good. And he signed the form without touching the vehicle, without even getting close. He was about 50 feet away from the vehicle. And guess what? I said, well, let me try this out. I submitted that and it got accepted. There are, stories of people talking about how you don't even need to get another inspection. Just use your inspection a year ago, change the date, submit it, and you're good to go. So there's opportunity for manipulating a document. Well, we don't allow that. So we have the document coming directly from the primary source to the person who needs to receive it. There's no opportunity to tamper with it. And so there's a lot of challenges with the traditional mechanic process. And when we started sharing some of these stories and things that you can find online of people talking about how they have committed inspection fraud, eventually we won them over, and the chief compliance officer agreed that what we're doing is not only safe, but it also eliminates a lot of the issues that maybe exist within traditional mechanic shops of people either not doing thorough inspections or people being able to manipulate the inspection forms. And so what I'd encourage people to do, where I'm going with this, is keep an open mind. Look at the data. Thankfully, we had an opportunity where one of the large TNC companies was trying to validate the quality of our inspections. They took a sample size of 4,000 vehicles we inspected based on the VIN numbers and compared it to the total fleet that they had. And they realized that they concluded that the quality of the inspections done by our company was, as good as, there was no deviation statistically between the vehicles we inspected and the ones that went to the traditional brick and mortar mechanic shop. So that was good validation. So the data is really important. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. Yes, we're doing things a little bit differently, a little bit more, disruptive, innovative, if you will. But there's a reason, and we really can check all the boxes in terms of safety, convenience, reducing cost and headache for TPs, satisfying the regulators, the regulators, the government bodies, the MCOs, the payers, the health plans, satisfying their requirements even easier with more efficiency and digitization, helping the brokers do their job, and helping the TPs run their business more profitably with easier operations and a better user experience. So that's what I would encourage people to do, is really just have an open mind and do the data, look at the data, and frankly, reach out. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, this totally hits on the broader theme that there's really not a lot of regulation yet in the NEMT industry, but that regulation is coming. And TPs and brokers who, want to stay ahead of the game and be prepared for when the regulation comes in, I mean, you're the future. The data is there to prove it, as you explained. So your team is doing great work. Thank you so much, Hamed, for your time.
Run, Bambi, run.
Perfect. Thanks, Hamed.
Awesome. Of course, Nirav.